Greetings, everybody. I'm Richard Hayes, and here we're in another session of Thinking with the Apostle Paul. And we just had a great time. We just finished up the book of Galatians, and our goal in this is just to take all the Pauline letters and go through them and bring out the major truths. Why? Well, these are the truths that basically have produced the Western world and that have produced all the blessing that has come over the Western world is through the truths that have been birthed through the Pauline interpretation of the life of Christ. So this is really fantastic. And here in our ministry, the Lord just kind of opened to us a certain understanding that as we've been able to get this understanding in our people, it just causes tremendous impact in their lives. And so obviously one of the things that we're doing, and our vision here has been based off the Apostle Paul and his understanding, but putting in foundations that have a legal consequence. And that legal consequence is that heaven becomes open to anybody who understands this and believes it. And so all of a sudden here you are, just a normal human, but something's different now, that you have a foundation in God that lets the consequence of that foundation, which being an open heaven, operate in your life. And so the consequence is, obviously, you have radical changes in your personal life, but your personal life begins to have a very strong impact. So you end up becoming an agent of change, or you impact our world. So that is one of the reasons that we've just decided, hey, we're just going to take the time here and go through this. Now, this is one of the books, Colossians, that I really like. I have a little Bible program that basically it's the Bible recorded. And so a lot of times when I just want kind of a little pep up, I'll click on that and it just starts sharing Colossians 1. It's read and it's kind of a little bit dramatized. And I tell you, when they start getting to who Jesus is and all this stuff here in chapter 1 that we'll get to talk about together too, maybe not today, but soon, all of a sudden, it just blesses me so much to understand that God is actually letting us understand and participate in this and the consequence of it as we live our daily lives. So I'm really excited about it. So I'm glad that we can do this together. Book of Colossians, 4 chapters. Now, when this book is written, this book becomes a consequence book. And it's the consequence of when Paul was in Ephesus. And he was in Ephesus, and as he was there, he was preaching and teaching for around 3 years. And so the Bible tells us, or the New Testament tells us, that in about a span of a little over 2 years, they basically reached out and touched all of Asia Minor. And this would be another lesson for us. But one of the things that I think that I see as we work with apostolic concepts is that I see apostolic teams, then I see apostolic houses. And I see one is that an apostolic team may go into an area very much like Paul did with his team, and then they may establish a base, or what becomes an apostolic house. And this becomes a house that is a resource house, in the sense that the church in Antioch becomes a resource church. It's a regional church. It just does not have the local authority of the church itself, but it's a church that is reaching out to a whole geographic area. So some people would call this like mother churches. Other people would call them apostolic houses, like I do. And it's fantastic. And so what we're seeing is that Paul goes in with the team. And then one of the things that I particularly think is that one becomes the other. You go into a team, but the goal of the team is to establish an apostolic house. And from there, you begin to shift into what we call Jerusalem, Judea, uttermost part of the earth mode. Jerusalem, Judea, uttermost part of the earth mode. And so that's what's going on in Ephesus. They've established an apostolic house or an apostolic center. They're teaching, they're preaching, they're developing leaders. They have a great church there, and it continues to be a resource to the places all around. And I say we here in Monterey, we have a monthly Bible school. Years ago, I began to look at a long-term perspective, and I understand in our culture today, a lot of people can't go to the Bible school one night a week. So we just set it up that we're going to do Bible teaching, Bible school once a month. And we went for 20-something years without stopping till the pandemic came. And now we're back doing it again. And so, but once a month, we're teaching, we're sharing, we're growing leaders, we're helping them. And so, but that's what Paul was doing. But Paul was doing it like weekly. They would teach almost every day, every week. And so in 2 years, people would come into his school, they would listen to him, listen to his teaching, formal, informal, in other words, formal in the sense that they're doing it on a regular basis, but informal, they're not doing degrees or anything like that. They're just teaching who Jesus is. They're teaching who Jesus is, what Jesus has done, how that affects you, and then the consequence of it in your life, and now, what is your purpose? And so as they're going through this, and of course, ours would be the very same thing. Oftentimes we say the Bible is only about 4 things. It's about who is God. And of course, in that is obviously the Lord Jesus Christ. And then who are you because of what Christ has done? Number 2, who are you because of what Christ has done? And then number 3, what do you have? In other words, because now Romans 8:17 says, you're an heir of God and an equal heir with Jesus. And so the third question is, what is your inheritance? What is your inheritance in this life? And what is your inheritance in the next life? And then the next one, number 4, is basically, hey, what is your purpose? What is the purpose of this new state that you have, this new identity that you have? What is the purpose of this new inheritance that you have, the whole supernatural dimension and the image of God in you? And so what is it for? And so those are the things that are really being dealt with here. And so one of the guys who's in this season or coming to these teachings is a guy named Epaphras. So Epaphras evidently has become a Christian, has united himself to the Lord, and he is going back and forth. We don't know, but he is the one who is having the concern for the church in Colossae. So we could say that Paul never went to that church, at least not personally. But some things have come up there. Now, as Paul writes this, he's no longer in Ephesus. He's in jail, and he's in jail in Rome. So what happened? So Epaphras, some things have started to happen. Some things have started to boil up, and they could be bad, not bad yet. But just let me say, they could be bad, but they're not bad yet. But they're growing, and so he feels a real need for understanding on how to head some of this stuff off. So what is very interesting, Colossae is to the east of Ephesus. Rome is due west. And so Epaphras literally goes all the way to Rome to talk to Paul about the situation in his church. Hey, this sounds like a good leader to me. This sounds like a great pastor. And so what are some of the things that are coming up? Some kind of mystical type stuff, some mysticism, some things that eventually became Gnosticism. At this moment, it is not super clear what Gnosticism is historically, but things that do become encountered in the sense that one of the issues of Gnosticism is that God is good, but matter, the creation, is evil. And so, and Jesus is not quite God. And so what happens is that they end up getting a distorted view of who God is, and obviously salvation and things of this nature. And then at the same time, there's a strong Jewish community in Colossae as well. So you end up with some of this mysticism, you end up with some of this Gnosticism, then you also end up with some of this legalism, and then the push, the Jewish rituals and the law, and the whole circumcision issues again. So all the stuff is kind of churning in Colossae. So Epaphras goes to Rome, and there he sits down with the Apostle Paul. it looks like this is the season where Paul is under house arrest. That's what the book of Acts tells us. And so he is incarcerated, but not in a prison. He has a place where he can stay, and the thing is, but he has to be under house arrest. So this is taking place, and Epaphras has come and talking to him about the problem. Now this is all happening around between 62 and 60 after Christ, AC, or I'm thinking Spanish, excuse me. And so it's about the year, but 60 to 62, somewhere right in there. And so that's what's going on. Now, all the church fathers that are recognized historically agree that Paul is the one who basically is the author to this. And, if you've read it and read anything else of Paul, that's not an issue. But sometimes religious people really got to try to, go out on the edge. So Paul is the author without any doubt. So let's move on over to the letter. And so written to Colossians, and I just love it. And we're going to use the New Living Translation like we've been using before, but we're also going to use the King James Version a little bit today. There's some things here that I like the way it says it, and especially as we go on some of these introductory verses, okay? Colossians 1, verse 1, Paul, yeah, that's his name, an apostle of Jesus Christ. There's a lot that is implied here, and I love, when you understand context and then you understand the people that are in the context, a lot of things really show up by implication. And when you know what certain things mean, and one of the things that I always, when I'm talking about the Pauline letters, and especially about these, one of the things that becomes very clear is, what does Paul's name mean? And so I think, here's one of the most significant minds in the Western world. Much of what, in other words, one of the most famous names in all of human history, probably the most famous name in all of human history would be Abraham. And then the next one would probably be Moses. And then Jesus, depending on what part of the world you're in, would obviously, in the West, would say probably Jesus is more recognized, maybe even than Abraham. But if we talk pretty much all around the world, Abraham is probably going to be the most famous name, and because so much of Islam that's around the world, well, Abraham is a major figure in the Islamic faith, and so is Moses a major figure in the Islamic faith. Jesus is recognized as a prophet in the Islamic faith, but basically what I'm trying to say with all this is that this is not an insignificant thing that is going on here. This name, Paul, is one of the most recognized names in humanity throughout the history of the last 2,000 years. And so, what does his name mean? Now, this is what I think we need to focus in on, is that here is a man whose reputation is a worldwide reputation. Here is a man who's been recognized, and as it says right here in this verse, that God himself has called him to represent him. Wow. He is an apostle, which means that he has been given authority. And authority from where? Authority from heaven itself, authority from God himself in the earth. Okay. And so what does Paul's name mean anyway? Little, small one. And to me, that is just so wonderful in the sense that, and I think that would exactly be the way that Paul would see himself, in the sense that even after everything that he's gone through, in the Philippian letter, where we're talking about that I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews, I'm a Pharisee of the Pharisees, I studied at Gamaliel's feet, who he really is, or all his pedigree, we could say. Now he's saying, I am nothing. And the thing is, he deliberately chooses the name Paul as he goes into the Greek world, which is obviously interpreted from Saul. But anyway, I just think this, the Bible just throws this little contrast out there. Paul means small. A lot of people, historically, it looks like he might not have been excessively tall, a normal guy. But the thing is, he is in his heart. He understands who Jesus is and that he has been apprehended by him. God has taken his hand and reached out and grabbed a hold of him. We could talk about his conversion for a few minutes, because when he was going, it was called Saul. And this would not have been his self-image or his self-mentality as he was going to Damascus to arrest and persecute Christians. But when he had this encounter redefines everything. And God speaks to him, and he listens, and he understands that he has been called to be an apostle. So, we're still here in verse 1. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. You could actually stick the word in here, belonging to Jesus Christ, representing Jesus Christ. The apostolic ministry apostle means one who is sent forth. And the whole concept of apostleness is somebody in the Greek world, for example, an apostolic company. One of the things that would happen when Alexander the Great would conquer a nation, he would basically form what they would call an apostolic mission or an apostolic company. And they would have the charge of taking the Greek culture. What do you need to take the Greek culture and transplant it into another culture? And so that's what he would do. He would send teachers, he would send musicians, he would send artists, he would send whatever was needed, government officials, he would send religious leaders, but whatever that they needed to transplant the Greek culture into that new culture that had recently been conquered. Well, that's what the apostolic mission was. So as we look at its historical context, this is pretty powerful. That the Apostle Paul, and it makes you think of the Lord's Prayer in this right here in the richardhayes.org. We've been doing this. Eternal life is a relationship. And it makes you think of this phrase in the Lord's Prayer where it says, "Thy will be done. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." Where? On earth as it is in heaven. So what we want to begin to see is that a couple of things. One is that his mission is to bring the culture, the kingdom of heaven into the earth. That is his mandate. As Paul writes in the Timothean letter later, one of the things that he's going to imply is that the house of God is the place where God is on deposit. And that, so this whole issue of establishing houses, apostolic ministries, apostolic teams becomes a real issue, because this is where the heaven culture is deposited and spread out in the earth. And so, apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God. It almost kind of sounds sovereign, doesn't it? That God has willed and has enabled him, and Jesus Christ has called him. I am an apostle of this Jesus Christ, the one who's came and redefined everything, the one who's came and has redefined me. I am nothing, but he is everything. And by his will, the will of the Father, who has included me in the work of Christ, I belong to him now. I do not have my own will. If we had time to get into the offerings, one of these is a whole burnt offering in the book of Leviticus. And the Apostle Paul will actually refer to himself as being offered up in the in the Philippian letter, and making reference to, well, what was the whole burnt offering about? In Spanish, it's called the Holocaust offering. And what it means is totally consumed. So he's saying, I am of Jesus. I am totally consumed. I have offered myself to not have my own will, but to have the will of God through Jesus Christ in me and through me. Great, great. And Timothy's here with me. Oh, Timothy is here with me. Now, just in the lasting thought, here's the thing. You remember in Galatians when we were talking about, he says, even though the heir is a child, he's the owner of everything. But what does the father do? So that he is the heir, but he has nothing, but he's the owner of everything. So what does the father do? Well, the father then, he takes teachers and tutors to teach who the father is and what the father has, so that he can know who he is and what he has. Now, that phrase right there, where Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God, and Timothy, our brother, has an incredible implication, because Timothy is a disciple of Paul. And so now Timothy is being included, and his role in this team is being shown. And here Timothy is with Paul and being supposedly somewhat involved in this letter. But the thing that I really would like to jump to just as we finish is that the Great Commission. The Great Commission is often interpreted as evangelism, but Jesus made it very clear that he said, go and teach and make disciples of all nations. So here Paul has one of his chief disciples with him as they are directing themselves to the issues in Colossae. Great beginning. Great beginning. Okay, we'll just stop here for today, but I think we got a good start. And we're going to continue to jump into this letter, and I'm very excited about it, and I hope you are as well. Bless you. This is richardhayes.org. Remember the podcast. I did 2 tremendous interviews this week. I hope you can catch up with them on the podcast Perspectives with Richard Hayes. Bless you. We'll see you in the next one.